Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I am here with the Big Book Summer Challenge wrap-up for 2024. And it was a record-breaking year all around. In fact, I'm late making this video today. It's like well into lunchtime and almost my nap time because it took me so long to tally up all the participants in the challenge this year. That's usually like a 15-minute task. It took like an hour and a half today. But I've got everything written down in my Big Book Summer notebook. I will get to my own Big Book Summer in a moment. Just a reminder, this was the 12th year of the challenge, and I think the 4th year on BookTube. I've had a blog for about 18 years, so it started there. But the response this year, for some reason, was just huge. It just kind of blew up, which was a lot of fun to see, though I had trouble keeping up with it in terms of administration, I guess. So I will have to change some things last year. So in the early years, I'd get a dozen or so participants. Last year, and it was growing every year. Last year, there were 60 participants. This year, the final tally was 174 participants. Bloggers, booktubers, and lots and lots and lots of readers. So I'll give you some quick stats on that. Of the 174 participants, 11 were bloggers, 24 were booktubers who signed up as booktubers. That means they either left a link to their video on my blog sign-up page or they tagged me in their video so that I could find it. It was one of the things that took a lot of time today. There were some booktubers who just chose to sign up through the Goodreads group, and that's fine. So there were 139 readers signed up through the Goodreads group. And like I said, a couple of those were booktubers that hadn't signed up with their channel. So altogether, 174 participants. That is huge, and I won't leave you in suspense. As I explained at the beginning of the summer, there is a giveaway at the end of each summer, though I'll have to see if I can keep doing it for next year, because that's why I have to keep a careful tally of who signs up, is for the giveaway at the end. So we might have grown beyond that this year, but I did manage it. I counted every single participant. If you signed up with a blog, a BookTube channel, or on the Goodreads group, I counted you. And of those 174, I used a random number generator and picked this year's Big Book Summer giveaway winner. And that is Tina from the Goodreads group. She's from Illinois. And the cool thing is, Tina is a past participant in other Big Book Summers, but she had to take a break the last 2 years because she was finishing grad school. So this was her first summer back after finishing grad school. So I thought that was a nice touch for her, a nice way to celebrate the end of school and getting back into Big Book Summer. So I will contact Tina through the Goodreads channel, or through the Goodreads group and through her Goodreads account. But Tina, if you're watching, let me know. I think a lot of the growth this year came from BookTube itself, because the more channels that were talking about it, the more people that heard about it, which was great. So if you're a booktuber who participated in Big Book Summer, thank you so much for talking about it and participating and helping to spread the word, because it was so much fun. The other thing that has helped a lot in the last few years in terms of growth of the Big Book Summer Challenge is the Book Cougars podcast. It's run by Chris and Emily, two friends of mine who are booktopians, And although Chris and I first met in the blogging world, they've been doing the challenge for several years and talking about it on their podcast, which is fabulous. Check out Book Cougars if you haven't already. 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, we were at Booktopia and they interviewed me about Big Book Summer for their podcast. And then the last 2 years, they've talked about it. They've chosen read-alongs for Big Book Summer. So thank you, Chris and Emily, as well, for helping to spread the word and grow the joy that is Big Book Summer. I guess I should have mentioned, just in case you didn't participate, what it is. It is simply a laid-back summer challenge to read at least one book of 400 or more pages between the last Friday in May, usually, it's the Friday of Memorial Day weekend here in the U.S., and the first Monday in September, which is Labor Day here in the U.S. So you can just read one book of 400 pages and that counts. You can choose to read 2 or 3 books during the summer that fit that criteria, and all books count. Or you can do what I do, the crazy thing that I do, and pick a whole big stack that it took me like 10 different takes to get my photo for the cover shot because the stack of books that I read is so heavy. So I will sum up for you my own Big Book Summer. And if you participated here on BookTube, I've seen a lot of Big Book Summer wrap-up videos already, and they've been great. But if you haven't and you'd like to, please be sure to tag me so I can see your wrap-up. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I read 12 books for Big Book Summer. They were evenly split, 6 in print, 6 on audio. I always do audios for Big Book Summer as well. Last year I read 14, but this year 2 of my print books were over 850 pages. So I think I think I did pretty well there. So, quick rundown. My first big book audio for this summer was The Women by Kristen Hanna. That was 480 pages in print. After I finished this novel, I just kept saying to myself over and over, and you probably heard me say it here several times too, stunning. It really is a stunning novel. It's an engrossing story, great characters, but also just so powerful. It's about women in Vietnam and centers on one particular woman who worked as a nurse during the Vietnam War. It's about their experiences during the war, but also what happened after, the lack of recognition that there were any women in Vietnam, of course, the public outcry against the war, which turned into an outcry against the people that were there. It is a powerful, moving novel, and I think so, so important. And it was outstanding on audio. I think the emotions just really came through on audio. So my next big book for the summer was one of my biggest, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. And this was 858 pages. So many people, when I said I was going to read this for Big Book Summer and also June on the Range, it worked out perfectly. So many people said they were also going to read it that I turned it into the Big Book Summer read-along. And we've got a discussion group in Goodreads. The Goodreads group is still open. If you participated here on BookTube or in the blogging world or just as a reader and read this summer or recently and haven't participated in the discussion, I'd encourage you to go and check that out. The group will stay up. So there's a whole separate discussion thread. Well, there's one that's spoiler-free for while we were reading, but there's also one where spoilers are allowed for thoughts after finishing the book. And there's just so much to this book. This book really surprised me. This was probably my biggest surprise of the summer. I've heard thousands of people say that it's an amazing book. So yeah, this book surprised me because I expected to like it. I didn't expect it to take me on such a roller coaster ride of emotions. I was sobbing with this book 3 different times. It often made me laugh out loud. My husband watched me read it, and as soon as I finished, he picked it up, and he also read it for Big Book Summer. It is an outstanding novel. Whether you think you like Westerns or not, I highly recommend it. Just keep the box of tissues close by. Since that book took me a whole month to read, I fit in a few audios in the meantime. I listened to Countdown by Deborah Wiles. This is a middle grade novel. It's book 1 in her 60s trilogy, which is outstanding. I recommend the whole trilogy. I do have the print book because what makes these books so unique is that they are fiction about a fictional 11-year-old girl, in this case, in 1962, living through the Cuban Missile Crisis and some of the other world events that were happening at that time. But what Deborah Wiles does so amazingly is incorporate real life media from the time. News photographs. There was a lot, because this was an 11-year-old girl in 1962. Actual information about duck and cover drills. Quotes from the news, photos of celebrities, advertisements from the time. And all of this is interspersed. There's a headline from the time. All of this is interspersed with the fictional story. On the audio, it was done beautifully. I did get the book out of the library because I wanted to see it in print as well. But the audio was just as good, with snippets from real radio broadcasts, radio ads, Walter Cronkite reading the evening's news, JFK giving his address to the nation. So the whole trilogy is outstanding. Really recommend anything by Deborah Wiles. But the 60s trilogy is great. This one, and Countdown was 400 pages. Mr. Nice Guy was also 400 pages. That's by Jennifer Miller and Jason Pfeiffer. It had been sitting in my audio backlog, my audio review backlog, for a number of years. I think it's a 2018 release. And I thought it would be something light and fluffy. And there is some humor to it. It's written by a husband and wife team. But much to my surprise and delight, it also digs into some serious issues about women in the workplace, about sexual harassment, about inequality. So it was really great. It's kind of a he said, she said thing where the sex columnist for a New York magazine kind of takes down this guy she nicknames Mr. Nice Guy that she slept with, and he writes into the magazine with a rebuttal. And the magazine actually hires him anonymously, and they're each writing their own columns every week. So there's some humor to it. It is funny, but it's also got some depth. So I enjoyed Mr. Nice Guy. Another audio I fit in June while I was reading Lonesome Dove was Hereafter by Tara Hudson, a 432-page young adult novel. It's a ghost story. It's about a young girl in a river who she knows she died by drowning. She doesn't know, she can't remember the exact circumstances. And she's in the river one day. She keeps kind of reliving her death, which is very disturbing for her. And this has just happened to her. She's in the river and she sees another person in the river sinking. And although she can't normally touch or interact with living humans, somehow she manages to save this guy's life. And then she finds that he can actually see her. No one else in all the time she's been dead, and she doesn't even know how long that's been, has been able to see her. But this young man that she rescued can. So it's YA, there's a bit of a love story there, but it's really about this vision of the afterlife or the in-between life where she is. It's a battle of good versus evil. This was book 1 in a trilogy, so there's going to be more, or there is more, this is an older book as well, about this battle between good and evil. So I enjoyed that. I always like a good ghost story. Oops, I found out that I stuck one of my big books on the keeper favorites shelf already, and that was Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Booley. Yeah, in between Lonesome Dove and another 880-page book, I thought I needed something a little shorter. I didn't realize it. Yeah, I know there's a sticker on the front. I guess I didn't notice that before I started reading it. I didn't realize this was YA. And it's the kind of book that will appeal to everyone. You don't have to be a young person to enjoy it. This is, and I didn't know this either. I had heard so many people rave about this book over the years, but I didn't really know what it was about. It's actually a mystery thriller, which surprised me, featuring an 18-year-old young woman who is, her mother comes from Italian and French parents. Her father is from the local Ojibwe tribe. And so she kind of feels torn between two worlds. It is the mystery thriller aspects center around meth getting into their community, affecting all parts of the community, the indigenous people as well as everyone else. And she gets pulled into trying to help the police find out who's behind it. Even though there's a lot of emotional depth here, the cultural background is fascinating, a lot of history and culture here. It is also a fast-paced, gripping thriller. So I really enjoyed this, and I can't wait to read her second book. After that little palate cleanser that only took about a week to read, I went back to another month-long book, and that is Drums of Autumn by Diana Gabaldon. This is book 4 in the Outlander series. I love this series. It seems that each book just gets better and better. Last summer, when I read book 3, Voyager, I said it was my favorite so far. Yeah, now I think this might be my favorite. So you can see the pattern there. These are just completely immersive historical fiction with a time travel element. I love time travel. I love how thought-provoking it is, and there's plenty of that in this entry to the series. I loved the setting of book 4, which is in Western North Carolina, here in America. The area that we now call the Smoky Mountains. My husband and I have been there and love that area, so that was wonderful to kind of experience that. And I always get completely engrossed in the Outlander books, but this one especially, I was reading it when I got COVID. I had just started it when I got COVID. I'm still not fully recovered, but I was extremely sick, like can't move off the couch sick for the first 3 or 4 weeks. So this was a wonderful accompaniment. I felt so awful for those first 3 weeks, and this was just a wonderful world to lose myself in. So highly recommend the whole series. It just seems to be getting better and better. Oh, and that one was 880 pages, so another really big chunkster. At the beginning of August, I read Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. This was a must read on my Big Book Summer stack. For the most part, it was a pile of possibilities. This one I was determined to get to because it had been in my Big Book Summer stack for 2 previous years. I wasn't going to let it sit another year. I've heard such wonderful things about it, and I really wanted to read it. It's just, I mean, this is the point of Big Book Summer. It's those bigger books that you look at on your shelf and you say, I really want to read that, but I just don't have the time now. So I am so glad I finally got to this book. Now, I had heard it had some similarities to Cloud Atlas, and I can see where that comes from. Like Cloud Atlas, oh, I'm pointing behind me because it's sitting right down here. Like Cloud Atlas, it is different stories set in different time periods and different places that all sort of interrelate. Now, with Cloud Atlas, those interrelations are very subtle threads. With Cloud Cuckoo Land, it's a lot more obvious what the connection is. Each of these different stories, and they go from 1400s Constantinople to 2020 Idaho to sometime in the future out in outer space. And all of these stories are connected by a single story. And that is Cloud Cuckoo Land is the name of the story. It is a fictional, the author made it up, a fictional Greek story told by a real life ancient Greek author. So Anthony Doerr took a real life Greek author, apparently, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in here about books and about how many books have been lost to time, about how such a small percentage of what was written in ancient times has survived to the present day. So I'm sure that is what inspired Anthony Doerr, because he takes that concept and creates one of those stories from ancient Greece that has been lost to time and has only recently been discovered with a lot missing from it. So that story ties all the different characters in the different time periods together, from the 1400s to sometime in the distant future. It is wonderful, it is moving, it is heartwarming, there's some humor in it. It's thought-provoking, and it is completely engrossing. There are some plot twists and some connections that I absolutely did not see coming and was very surprised by in the last quarter of the book. So excellent book. It was just as good as I'd heard. I'm glad I finally got to it. And that was 574 pages. On audio in August, I had a double feature. The publisher offered me the audio version of Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune for review. And it comes out September 10th, so you don't have long to wait now. And this is the sequel to House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. Well, since I had never read the first book, I accepted the review book and then got myself a copy of House in the Cerulean Sea. I listened to both of them on audio. These books are wonderful. They are just so full of warmth and light and joy. They're a delight to read. Basic storyline centers around a house where children with magical powers, children with unusual magical powers, are cared for. I'm trying to think how to put this without giving too much away. Yeah, so it's a world where magic exists. There is some prejudice against people who have magical abilities. And so these children whose magical abilities are pretty extreme have kind of been ostracized. They're on this island and being taken care of. And that's what the story is about, and about the adults who care for these children. The children are absolutely delightful. If you're a fan of House in the Cerulean Sea, but you read it in print, I would highly recommend the audio of both that and the sequel, Somewhere Beyond the Sea, because it's a multi-narrator. I don't think it's full cast, but it's multi-narrator. Each of the children has their own unique voice. It is hilarious. It's laugh out loud funny. And all of that warmth comes through beautifully in the audio as well. It's a wonderful story. The second book, I think, has a little more tension, a little more suspense to it. But I can assure you, as you know if you've read any T.J. Klune, it is a happily ever after. And I thoroughly enjoyed living in that world for several weeks. So each of those audios was 416 pages in print. Toward the end of August, I was saving one book as a read-along at the very end of August. And so I had these three to choose from to squeeze in one more. Now these first two are much shorter, but my husband told me, no, you have to read The Ferryman by Justin Cronin. And he promised me, he said, even though it's over 500 pages, it's a really fast read because it's so gripping and fast-paced. And believe me, you'll get through it in time. Well, he was right on all counts. I loved this book. It was quite a surprise to me. So Justin Cronin is the author of, it's right up here, the Passage trilogy. He's also written a wonderful realistic fiction called The Summer Guest. So this is a science fiction. It has some thriller elements to it as well. But that's all that it has in common with The Passage. It is completely different. It begins on this remote island that is somehow isolated from the rest of the world. All we know is that some kind of crisis affected the outside world, and so this island was created as a kind of utopia. In this world on this island, which is called Prospera, no one ever dies. Everyone's health is monitored constantly. Mental, physical, and emotional health. And when their health begins to decline, and certainly before it reaches 10%, they are retired. And when someone retires, the ferryman, one of the main characters here, who works as a ferryman, guides them to a ferry where they take a ferry over to another island called the nursery. And at the nursery, they are reiterated. And we don't know what that is at the beginning of this story. Only that at some point, they will take a ferry back to Prospera as a 16-year-old new iterant who has no memory of his or her past life or lives, and start fresh. So that's kind of the setup for this world. The main character, Proctor Bennett, who works as a ferryman, is completely satisfied with his life, but then some things start happening. Some things that make him start thinking, maybe their world isn't perfect. He starts seeing some cracks and some flaws. And that's all I can say about the plot, because one of the absolute delights of this book is that it is packed with surprises in every chapter. Every time you think you've figured it out and you know what's going on, there is another surprise. In fact, I'm highly against spoilers, and normally I would not say, if there's one big twist in a book, I wouldn't tell you that because I think that is a spoiler. There are so many surprises in this book, it doesn't even matter if I say that because, yeah, you'll never see them coming. It was so much fun to read, but at the same time, like the best science fiction, although this is a world different from ours, the author gives us a lot of insights into humanity in general, into our society, and I love that. I love that thoughtfulness behind this kind of science fiction. There are a bunch of passages that I have marked that I'm going to add to my quote journal. So it is thoughtful, it has in-depth emotions, but it is also a fast-paced, gripping read. I absolutely loved The Ferryman. My last book for Big Book Summer was Trust by Hernan Diaz. I actually got to meet the author the day that his book was released. He was one of the Booktopia authors in, what was that, 2 years ago, right? 2022. So, of course, at the time, none of us had any idea, nor did he, that this book would end up creating such a buzz, that it would win the Pulitzer Prize, that it was just going to be such a big hit. So I finally got around to reading it. I saved this one for the end of the summer because I really wanted to buddy read it with my friend Nikki, who has the channel Red Dot Reads, though she hasn't been on it in a long time now. She's taken a break for life. But Nikki and I have stayed in touch. I love buddy reading with her. Both of us always feel like we get so much more from a book in discussing it with each other. So you can see my dog ears. It's almost like every other page because there were so many things I wanted to talk to Nikki about. Unfortunately, she's lost her voice this last week. So I haven't heard anything back from her yet because she can't speak, but I'm looking forward to hearing her thoughts. So Trust is a very unique novel. Within this novel, there are 4 different pieces of writing, each by a different character. And you only get the full picture in reading all these different perspectives. So first, there's a novel written by a novelist that was published in 1938. So this takes place like from the turn of the century to the late 30s. The second part is a partially finished autobiography by one of the characters. The third part is a memoir written by a journalist. And the fourth part is a journal from one of the characters. So you can tell I'm tiptoeing around which characters are involved and exactly what these are because this is another book that's full of surprises in a different way, but just as intriguing. So clearly the point here is that the story you get depends on who's telling it. And it's a very clever book. It's an unusual book. I know Nikki's initial comment, even though she couldn't speak, she texted a little bit, was that she wasn't sure how she felt about it after finishing it. I did enjoy it, but it's definitely a unique book in a unique format. But I think it's very thought-provoking and insightful. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Nikki on her thoughts. So that was my big book summer. But as if those weren't enough big books, I have started my fall reading for the RIP Challenge, the Readers Imbibing Peril. And my first book for that is a big book. I know, I never get enough. I've got a whole bunch of really short, shorter, quick, fast-paced reads set aside. You can see that in my RIP video. But I wanted to start with this one because I've been dying to read it, loving it so far. So that's my little Friday reads at the end here. So if you participated in Big Book Summer, please let me know in the comments down below what your summer of big book reading was like.